Beginning a new thing here this morning, a new series from the scriptures that we're going to be going through the summer, and it's on this guy named Abraham. That's going to be what we're going to be looking at here from now and into the end of the summer, beginning of September. Abraham is called in the Bible the father of all who believe. The father of all who believe. Part of what inspired me to preach on this is some of you know that I am the Protestant Christian representative on a local TV show called Abrahamic Faiths that is underwritten by the Islamic Society of Central Pennsylvania. In reality, it's underwritten by the one Muslim guy on the panel. He's the guy who pays for it, Dr. Muhammad Dowlett, a medical doctor in town. And so it's this interfaith dialogue that we tape once a month, and there will be 2 half-hour episodes that air on the local access channel on Thursdays and Sundays through the course of the month. And so I'm the Protestant representative on that panel. I've been doing it now for over a year. And what we talked about in our recordings that we did just a few days ago that are beginning to air here in this coming month, in the month of June, was on Abraham. I mean, the title of the show is Abrahamic Faiths because Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all recognize Abraham as our ancestor in some sense and recognize him and acknowledge him as foundational to our faith. That's something that these 3 religions have in common. So we were actually talking about Abraham this past week, and we're talking about Abraham's descendants. Who are Abraham's descendants and why does it matter? And as I was working on that and thinking about that, I was trying to think of what to do next after this long series on vision that has come to a conclusion with our wet cement session on Friday night. And by the way, with that, then it was a wonderful time of discernment. The envisioning team is taking what we gleaned from that to make some tweaks, some adjustments to the vision frame. But by and large, there was real support that this really is who we are and the direction that the Lord wants us to go. But we will be entering into a time here of actually going. If that is the direction that the Lord wants us to go, and if the sense among the people of God here as we listen to the Holy Spirit, as we listen to our head, Jesus Christ, is that this is the direction we're supposed to go, now we actually need to go. And that made me think, maybe it's really of the Lord that I'm supposed to be preparing to talk about Abraham on TV this week, because maybe this summer Abraham is a guy that we need to get to know. We need to get to know him. Because Abraham, first of all, if he is the father of all who believe, as Paul says in the New Testament, then we ought to get to know who our father is. We ought to get to know who our spiritual ancestor is. We ought to go back into the genealogy and get to know our family tree a little bit. But also because Abraham embraced a call without knowing where he was headed. But he had faith that the one who called him would deliver on his promises. And that's the situation that I believe that we are in as a church and that every single Christian individual in this church or anywhere in the world is in. If we're a Christian, if we're a follower of Jesus Christ, we have embraced a call to go, to do, to sacrifice, to lay our lives down at his feet and to take up his life as our life moving forward. To embrace that call without really knowing where we're headed. We have promises, though. Promises of what's going to happen if we go there. Promises of what's going to happen if we obey what God says in the Scriptures. Promises of what's going to come if we place our faith in Jesus Christ. Promises of the new world that is going to come when Jesus comes back that we can inherit if we have faith in him. Promises, 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 but the actual path from here to there, the actual consequences in the near term and the short term of what's going to happen if I actually do what the Bible says. What's going to happen if I actually give up what the Bible tells me to give up? What's going to happen if I make Jesus Christ and his truth number one in my life and my number one decision maker for what's valuable and what's not valuable? What's going to happen to me? We don't really know. But we step out, and we do that in faith because we trust that the person who's made the promises is going to deliver. We trust that the person who's promised of this destiny that's revealed in the Bible, that destiny really is going to come, that it's not just wishful thinking, it's not just imaginary, it's not just a great story, but that it's actually real. It's actually describing the end of the history of the world and the history of my history, the end of your history. That's what we have faith in, just like Abraham. And Abraham's call that we're going to look at, that Ashley just read for us here, his call in the book of Genesis is of crucial importance. It's critical importance for us. And you can see by where it falls in the book of Genesis. See, if you look at the whole book of Genesis, this first book of the Bible, Genesis falls in two halves, two portions, and they're unequal in size. The second half is a lot longer than the first half. The first half is the first 11 chapters of this 50-chapter book. And if you read the first 11 chapters, that gets us from the beginning of the entire world to Abraham. And that section of 11 chapters describes factual things. We Christians believe that they are factual things, and describing people who actually lived and actually existed, historical persons like Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Noah. And yet, those people and the things that happened to them are, even though they're historical people that did historical things, they're not really described in a historical way in Genesis 1 through 11. And what I mean is, when you read Genesis 1 through 11, it doesn't read like history as we normally expect it when we read history. And not just the history books that we might read today, buy at Barnes & Noble and read, but the history within the Bible itself. It reads like legend, or even in some places like myth. And by myth, I want you to understand very clearly, I don't mean falsehood. I don't mean not true. I mean the style of how it comes out, of how it's described. So for example, you folks know the story of Adam and Eve, right? You know the story of Adam and Eve, and you can read in Genesis 2 and 3 the story of Adam and Eve. And in Genesis 3, with the fall of humanity, Adam and Eve are in dialogue with a talking snake. Now, every Christian in the world, every Christian forever, would tell you that that talking snake isn't a talking snake. A talking snake is the devil. We know this because the Bible tells us so. In the book of Revelation, John is talking about Satan, the devil, the evil one, this fallen angel, and he says, that ancient serpent, the devil. Now, some Christians would say, the devil appeared as a talking snake. So it was a physical snake that the devil possessed and then talked. And others might say, well, it wasn't actually a physical talking snake, but it was definitely the devil. It was definitely, certainly the devil talking to Eve, and the way it's described is as if he's a talking snake. But the point is, there is a historical thing that happened. There was a historical Adam and Eve, and they were there in a historical place, and the devil had a conversation with them on a particular day that if we only had a calendar long enough, we could point to that day on the calendar that he actually talked to them, and the human race actually did fall at that time. So I'm not denying any of that at all. It was historical, but how it's described and how it's written is weird. It doesn't read like ordinary history. It reads like legends or myths from other nations. The difference is that in this case, this legend and myth is actually true. But when we get to this part of Genesis where Abraham shows up, something very different happens. The tone of the whole book changes. Because up to that point, we're looking at all of humanity. You know, all of humanity is affected by the creation of Adam and Eve because they're the first humans. All of humanity is affected by the fall. All of humanity is affected by the flood. All of humanity is affected by the Tower of Babel. That's how it looks, this whole thing. But then all of a sudden, this view in Genesis 1 through 11 that includes all of humanity shrinks to one family. And the whole rest of the book of Genesis is about one family, the family of a guy named Terah. Now, why? Why does the book change so much from Genesis 11 to Genesis 12? Why does it shrink down to one family? It's because everything that's described in Genesis 1 through 11 is describing the problem of the human race, of all humans everywhere. We were all created in the image of God. We were all created in his likeness. We were all created immortal. We were all created to be in fellowship, to be in relationship with that God, the source of our life. And yet, in our first parents, Adam and Eve, we all fell. We all lost all of that. The image of God, though still in us, is marred, is perverted, is broken, is corrupted. We can't expect to live forever. We know we're going to die. We're alienated from that God so that we can't see him. He's all around us, and yet we're blinded. It's he's there, but we can't notice. Like he's on a frequency that we don't pick up anymore, unless there's some miraculous intervention on his part. And death and violence and oppression and pain and sin is the outcome of all of this. But God didn't leave us there. And that's what this call of Abraham is about. This call of Abraham is about God looking at the predicament of the human race and saying, I'm going to save them. Even though they ran from me, even though they rejected me, I'm coming to get them. I'm going to take them back. I'm going to defeat this evil one who has brought sin and evil among the people that I love. I'm going to crush him and banish him from this world forever. And I'm going to do all of that by starting with one guy. One guy. So the fall of humanity and the problems of humanity are global, but God's solution starts not with dealing with all of humanity at once, but one dude, a guy named Abraham. That's how his rescue plan starts. Although he's not called Abraham when we first see him. He's called Abram or Avram. And so the story of Abraham, of Abram, of how God calls Abram, is the beginning of the story of the salvation of the world, the beginning of the story of the salvation of humanity, and the beginning of the story of your salvation as an individual. If you as an individual want to be saved from all of this, the beginning point of your rescue is right here in Genesis 11 and 12. Now, there's more information about how God called Abram than what is here in Genesis. We get some other information in the book of Joshua in the Old Testament, the 6th book in the Bible, and also in the book of Acts in the New Testament. And I'm going to take all of those pieces and put them together to tell the story. So, Abram was born about 4,000 years ago. He was born about 2000 BC in a place called Ur. U-R, Ur. And it's called Ur of the Chaldeans, or in Hebrew, Ur of the Kasdim, who is this group of people who lived in this part of the world later on in what's called Mesopotamia, which is between these two great rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, which flow right down the middle of modern Iraq. Let me show you a picture of where Abram lived in Ur. Abram might have lived in one of these houses. These are ruins of houses that existed when Abram was alive. Now, of course, they had roofs on them back then. The walls went up higher. But this is basically what they were and what they looked like. So he might have actually lived in one of these houses right there. And you could actually go today. I mean, I don't know if you could. You probably have to get special permission or something, and maybe a whole troop of people carrying AK-47s around you or something to protect you. But you could go and you could walk into one of these buildings and maybe walk into the very house that Abram grew up in as a little boy 4,000 years ago. Now, Abram and his father, Terah, Abram was the oldest son, and Terah had two other sons as well, Nahor and Haran. And these folks all lived with their wives and with their children in Ur, and they did what everybody else in Ur did, and that is they worshiped idols. There was a particular idol that they liked to worship, a particular god that they made in statue form called Ur-Nammu, which means, Nana, and the place where that person was worshipped, that god of the moon was worshipped, was a place called Ur-Nammu. And Ur-Nammu has been dug up, and from the sky, it looks like this. This is the temple of Ur-Nammu. It's called a ziggurat. you can see that it's like this huge raised platform with these 3 staircases going up to it, one from dead on and then 2 going sideways along the wall. And you can see in the middle of this ziggurat, this big temple, that in the middle there's this smaller rectangle where it looks like it's kind of ruined and messed up. Well, that's because there was another platform that was smaller in size but the same shape that was built right there that now no longer exists. It's gone. They probably quarried the rock out of it to build other stuff. From the front, this temple looks like that. So you're looking at it from the front, and you can see where it's sort of cut off at the top. There was actually more of it going up on top of that with more stairs climbing up. And when you got to the top of that one, then there was an even smaller house that was on top of that, and that was considered the temple of Nana, the moon god of Ur. And so that's where the priests would be worshiping this god. So they sort of built a man-made mountain with these staircases so you could, in a manner of speaking, climb up to heaven, climb up to the sky, and meet with the god of the moon and worship him up there. This is what it looked like from the ground. Quite a stairway, huh? That's pretty impressive. Now imagine if there was even more stairs on top of that once you got up to the top. So, if you are familiar with the story in Genesis of the Tower of Babel, earlier in chapter 11, and they said, let's make for ourselves a city and let's make a tower that reaches to the heavens. This is what they were talking about. A structure that looks like this. This is the thing, okay? And if you can imagine then later, if you're familiar with this story in the Bible of Jacob, who is Abraham's grandson, when he sleeps one night and he sees a stairway that ascends to the heavens and there are angels going up and down on it, this is what he was picturing. Something that looked like this, except real, and it suddenly showed up. Okay? So Abram, just like his father Terah, just like his brothers Nahor and Haran, just like everybody he knew in Ur, worshipped the moon god at this place in Ur. And this is what he did. Now, what are idols? There's a lot of different definitions of idols that are good definitions of idols. They're accurate definitions of idols. I'd like to propose to you today that what an idol is idols are things that work that don't work. Idols are things that work that don't work. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean that we live a life that is very chaotic and that's very disruptive, and the unexpected things happen, and challenges arise, and they're difficult, and they're dangerous. And there's a lot of things in our lives that are out of control. And what an idol is a thing that works for us by giving us a convenient explanation of why things are happening to us the way they are, and not only that, but an explanation of how we can get the world back into the order that we like it to be. So, for example, you're living in Ur, you're sick, you need help. So you go to the temple of Nana, this idol, and you worship Nana to say, I must be sick because Nana is unhappy with me. He's unhappy with me because I haven't been worshiping him lately. So that provides a convenient explanation for why I'm sick right now. And so now I'm going to worship Nana and pray that Nana would heal me of this sickness that I have. And that provides me a convenient illusion of control, because now I have some control over this sickness. Before I didn't have control over this sickness. I couldn't choose how to get out of it. But now I have an idol, and the idol provides me an explanation that if I just bow down and worship that idol and give it a sacrifice, then I'll have control over my sickness and be able to take it away. That's the way I can get out of the situation that I'm in. There's all kinds of ways that we can do this. The way they did it in the ancient world is by actually creating a person and making a statue to represent that person and then doing things for the statue. But we can do it today in all kinds of ways. Probably the simplest to understand is money. Money is an easy idol because money provides a convenient explanation for the world. Why am I unhappy and my life is difficult? Because I don't have enough money. And it provides the illusion of control. If I can just get the money, then I will have control over my circumstances, and then I will be happy. Ta-da! Likewise, a relationship can be an idol, right? Why am I unhappy? Because I don't have that awesome, world-shaking love of my life that appears in movies. So that's my problem. That provides a convenient explanation for my unhappiness that happens to accord with the desires of my heart. And so if I can just get that thing, get that relationship, then I'll have control. I'll have regained control of my life and be able, as long as I have that person and keep that person happy, keep that person appeased, then I'll be set. They're idols. They work, but they don't work. They work for us mentally because they give us a convenient explanation. They give us the illusion of control. But they don't actually work because they're man-made. And we can't make anything stronger than ourselves. We can make something stronger than ourselves physically. We can build a rocket that can send us to the moon, which none of us can actually do on our own. But we can't create anything that can solve the ultimate problems that we have, the ultimate worries of our souls. We're capable to make a dishwasher that then saves us time in washing dishes, but we can't create something that solves the problem of now all of the other things competing for that time now that we don't have to spend as much time washing dishes as we used to. There's always other things, other problems, other difficulties and chaos that is beyond our ability to control, and the ultimate example of that is death. Death defies our ability to make sense of it. It defies our ability to explain it in a way that satisfies our hearts. It can satisfy our minds. Well, we die because we're biological creatures, but there's something within us as humans that, to our knowledge, other animals don't have, although we don't speak their languages, so maybe they do. But something within us that says, yeah, but there's something wrong with that. There's something that's not right about that. There's something about death that just doesn't fit. As much as I try to make it fit, there's something that seems unnatural about it and wrong. But why could it possibly seem wrong if everything in the world dies? And yet, this is what human beings think. Why do we think this? Because it is wrong. Because we weren't supposed to experience this. And we try to control it in one way or another. We try to put it off with health, with nutrition, with medicine, and yet we can't quite get around it because it still comes back and gets us and might get us in unexpected times when the person that we love dies unexpectedly. So idols are things that work, but they don't work. Worst thing about idols is that they compound the really big problem, the biggest problem, God. God is our biggest problem. He's our problem because he's the one that we're running from, that we're using idols to replace. And idols happen to be a particularly convenient explanation for our running from God. Because the way they explain us running from God is, we're not actually running from that God. He doesn't really exist because there are only these gods that we've made up in his place. And they seem to provide the neatest control of all. We can control God by domesticating him and making him the way we want. We can devise a God who looks the way we want him to look, who says the things we want him to say, who does the things we expect him to do, and who's neat and orderly. That's what we can do with our religion. That's what we can do with our mythology. That's what we can do with our art. That's what we can do with our technique. And we domesticate him and put him down. Now I know what God is like and what he's going to do. I've got him all figured out now. But those idols don't work if they're not real. And they're not real. And God is. This is the problem with the human race. This is your problem if you're a human being. You have a natural, inveterate tendency to do this. We all do. To devise the thing, to concoct the thing that in our mind makes the most sense and that gives us the illusion of the control over this chaotic world. But the real source of control and the reality behind that illusion is about to show up and introduce himself again to the human race. And he shows up to Abram. And he shows up to Abram while he's living here in Ur. And we see this in what a guy named Stephen says in the book of Acts. In Acts 7, he says, "The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham while he was still in Mesopotamia before he lived in Haran. 'Leave your country and your people,' God said, 'and go to the land I will show you.' So he left the land of the Chaldeans and settled in Haran. So, while he's there in Ur, God appears to him. He actually shows up, and Abram sees, whoa, this is the real thing. Now, what did Abram see? We don't really know. But whatever he saw something that made him realize, this is the real one. What we're climbing up all those stairs to worship is the fake one. I'm going with the real one from now on. And this call comes with an offer. And that's what we see here in Genesis chapter 12, which I hope you have open. I hope you followed along with what was read earlier by Ashley. Genesis 12, verses 1 through 3, gives the command, the commission to Abraham, and the promise that's associated with it. The Lord said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. And I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." This is an amazing set of promises, and there's really three here, three promises that are given to Abram, although we can take each of those and kind of break it down further. But we'll just keep it simple right now and give three. The one is a blessing of land. He says, "Go to the land I will show you." And as we continue on, as was read earlier, Abram does go to this land, and we'll see the land that he went to in a second. And he goes to this land, and when he gets there, you can see in verse 7, the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So there's land, there's a particular area of ground, of real estate, that Abram is being promised if he goes. The second thing he's being promised is blessing. And the blessing is associated with greatness. God says, "I will make your name great. You will be great. You will be impressive. I will bless you." And included in that is descendants. "I will make you into a great nation. I will bless and prosper you so much and so greatly that everyone in the world will know who you are, and your name will live on forever in this large number of people who count themselves as your descendants forever after." So the second thing is blessing, greatness. And the third thing is protection from enemies. God says, "I'll bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who hold you in contempt." Those people who oppose you, I will attack. And those people who are allied with you, I will bless, and therefore give everybody in the world incentive to bless you and to be helpful to you and be kind to you. And anybody who's not going to be helpful and kind to you, they're going to get it. And so these three things, the land, the blessing of greatness, and the salvation from enemies, these are the things that God says to Abram, "I will give you this if you go." Now, to get the blessing, Abram had to go alone. That's what God says. He says, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." And by the way, we know, even though as it's written in Genesis, the call comes after Terah and his family move from Ur, nevertheless, we know that this call is happening while Abram is in Ur, not only because Stephen tells us so in the New Testament, but just even what God says. Leave your country. Leave your people. Leave the place where you're born. Leave your birthplace is actually how it is literally. Leave that place. And so we know that that's where he's hearing it. But he's supposed to go alone. In the Hebrew, it's written, "Go by yourself from the place where you were born." Go by yourself. So in order to get the blessing, Abram had to go alone. And going alone meant no idols. It means we leave the idols back in Ur. We're not taking them with us. We're not taking with us any other explanation. We're not taking with us any other illusion of control. We're leaving that stuff behind, and it's God or nothing. It's the Lord or bust. That's it. Leave them. And also, it means leave your family. Leave your father's house. Leave them behind. Now, it does not mean leave his wife, Sarai. Okay, and it doesn't mean leave his possessions. I mean, all of that gets taken with. And so don't use this as to say, well, but what Pastor Corey said is that in order to get God's blessing, I need to leave everybody, including my spouse. Okay, if any of you here are thinking about leaving your spouse, please don't leave here today thinking that I told you that you should because God told Abram to leave everything. because God wanted Abram to take Sarai with him. That's very, very important. But everybody else in the family is supposed to leave him behind. And so what happens? Well, Abram's father, Terah, makes leaving a family affair. Now, we're not really sure how it happens, but Abram presumably said to his father, okay, I'm going. A guy named the Lord showed up, a God who said that he's real and that I have to go where he says. And Terah said, sounds like a good idea. Because the way we have it written here in Genesis 11 is, it's all about Terah. It says in verse 27, this is the account of Terah. Terah was the father of these three guys. They had these wives. Terah took the guys and their wives, and they went to this place called Haran. They went to this place right here. You can see at the bottom right, that's Ur in the southeast. That's where they started. And they traveled up along the Euphrates River until they got to Haran, up there in the top where the dark blue line ends. Those are the modern boundaries, by the way. Those didn't exist in Abram's day. So it makes it a family affair, and they go. So God tells Abram, go alone. And he doesn't go alone. The whole family goes up. And they not only get to Haran, but they actually settle there. They stop, and they're like, okay, we're going to live here from now on. And so Abram sits for how many years? We don't know, living there in Haran. God told him to go and leave his family, but Abraham's sitting there. Abram's sitting there living in Haran until his father Terah dies. So when his father Terah dies, then what happens? God talks to him again. God tells Abram to go again. We see this again in Acts chapter 7, what Stephen says. He says, after the death of his father, God sent him to this land where you are now living. And perhaps the reason that the call of Abram shows up as it does, where it does in Genesis, is because God actually said the same thing to him a second time. You know, after many years pass, God appears to Abram again and says, okay, Abram, I want to remind you what I told you before. Leave your country and your people and your father's household and go to the land I will show you. So, God tells Abram to go again, to go alone, to get the blessing that God has promised. Abram has to go alone. But then we see in verse 4, so Abram left as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. His nephew, Lot, went with him. So twice now, God tells Abram, leave and go by yourself. And twice Abram leaves not quite by himself. And we see this here. This is the rest of the route that was described there in what was read today. And so he goes. To get the blessing, Abram had to go alone, and he doesn't. He doesn't go alone, but he does go. Abram takes a big step. Not a perfect step, but a big step. And God is so gracious. He is so merciful that even though he wants you to take the perfect step, he'll work with you if you just take the big but imperfect step. Now, it'll go a whole lot better for you if you take the perfect step. And we'll see that here in the coming weeks as we see Abram and Lot and their interaction with one another as time goes on. It would have been a lot better for Abram if he had gone without Terah. And it would have been a lot better, or if once Terah decided to settle in Haran, Abram had kept going. And it would have gotten a lot better for Abram if he hadn't gone with Lot. But God was still willing to work with him, and he's still willing to work with you if you're willing to take the big step. Take the perfect step. But if you haven't taken the perfect step, God will still work with you if you take the big step, because he's so patient, and he's so gracious, and he's so merciful. So to get the blessing, Abram had to go alone. And we see this process through Genesis where he gets more and more alone the further we go on. Why did he go? Why did he take this step? Faith. Faith is the predominant characteristic of Abraham. Abram's faith is forward-looking, and it's based on a promise. Abram's faith is about something that God promised is going to happen and that is out there in the future. It's a future faith. Now, for us as Christians, our faith doesn't just look to the future. Our faith also looks at the past. Our faith is looking at something that happened in the past, namely the coming of Jesus, the Son of God, to save us from our sins. Abram didn't have that. For him, everything was future. But a lot of our faith is future too. Promise in eternal life. promise of immortality, promise that if we too go and follow his instructions, we too will be blessed. Abram's faith is forward-looking and it's based on a promise. Abram's faith was also proven by obedient action. You know that Abram had faith because he did what God said, period. You know that Abram had faith because he did what God said. You don't know that Abram had faith because he had a sort of vibe around him that when you got around him, you felt all peaceful and mystical and heard wind chimes in the air. I mean, like that's not how you knew that Abram had faith. You didn't know that Abram had faith because he talked so much about how much faith he had. You knew that Abram had faith because he did what God told him to do. If you don't do what God tells you to do, you don't have faith. You have something, but not the kind of faith that Abram had, not the kind of faith that results in the blessing to those who go it alone. See, to get the blessing, you have to go alone. If you want the blessing in your life, you have to go it alone. You need to prove your faith by obedient action. You need to trust the promises of a God who's going to fulfill them in the future. Now, it's a terrifying thing to go alone because idols, namely the things that work but don't work, are reassuring. They're reassuring, they're comforting. The illusion of control, the illusion that if I just had this or I just had that or I just had this other thing, or the illusion of I do have this and therefore if I keep feeding it, if I keep caring for it, if I keep appeasing it, whether that's a person or whether that's an item or whether that's a concept or idea or whether it's a dream that you're nursing, whatever that is, it's a comfortable thing. It's a comfortable thing. It's a reassuring thing. It tells us what it is that we want to hear, what we want to believe. And you know what? Family is reassuring too. Abram needed to leave family, and family is reassuring. Even if your family is lousy and terrible and you hate them, they're still reassuring. It's true. Because your family provides for you a sort of shape to your world, a set of assumptions about this is how people are, this is how people interact, this is how I know who I am. I know who I am because I'm a part of them, or I know who I am because I'm not them. Either way, it's part of the definition of self. Family is reassuring. It's easier to go if the whole tribe is affirming what you're doing. But to get the blessing, you have to go alone. To get the blessing, you have to go even if your family doesn't support you, even if your family doesn't believe you, even if your family needs you. To get the blessing, you have to go alone. And when I say this, I'm not talking about spouse. Because again, Abram's supposed to take his spouse. And I'm not talking about your kids. You got to be there for your kids. But I'm talking about the wider family beyond that. I'm talking about your parents, your siblings, the wider family beyond that. And I'm also not saying that you should break off relationship with them, because that's not really what going alone is. Going alone is the recognition that I've got to do what God says, independent of my family's approval or not. I want to remain in relationship with them, but their approval is not going to affect my decisions here. I've got to do what God says. To get the blessing, you have to go alone. But what a blessing it is. We're going to talk about it more and more as the time goes on. I'm only going to give you a snippet today. But let me just say for right now that the blessing that God offered Abraham is the blessing that he offers to everybody with the faith of Abraham. It's a blessing of land, and not just a strip along the eastern Mediterranean, but a new world, a new earth that is yours, that you can inherit. He offered Abram the promise of blessing and greatness and a name that would last forever. And he offers you a name that will last forever. He offers you greatness. He offers you prosperity that is beyond your wildest imaginations in that new place. And he offered Abram escape, salvation from enemies. And he offers you salvation from your worst enemy, death. The one enemy that you can put off but you can't get rid of no matter how badly you try. God can conquer it. He has done so, and he will do so in the future if you trust him. So what is God calling you to do in your conscience? What is